Hi, Vinay. How lovely and truly bizarre to be speaking to you in this kind of a format. I've just before the conversation watched the film again. And before we deep dive into this conversation, I wanted to quickly say one sort of a disclaimery line before we begin. It's not very often that you watch films that make you both re-engage and re-aestheticize what you construe as wounds, in society. And it's like this particular wound of the degradation of the media is something that is pervasive and global. Yet the thing about really good political films, be it the films of, say, Patricio Guzman or Anand Patwardhan, both filmmakers whose films your film reminded me of, you somehow leave you feeling both absolutely existentially desolate while at the same time inspired. And this is what I felt. You feel like absolutely, you feel rather dismayed while at the same time feeling energized. And it's this weird kind of a salient bipolarity that's at the heart of all of these films about this kind of a virtuous struggle. So, I mean, firstly, it was quite the emotional journey, and which also helps me segue into the first thing that I wanted to ask you, which was one about form in terms of the structure. What were the kinds of main structural challenges when you have one person who's your main vector and a series of like current affairs that sort of circulate around him? How did you talk us through some of the structural issues and so on that you had?
I will. Firstly, thank you for doing this. This means a lot to me. I'm a biggest fan of all that breeds. Uh, I don't think there has been a film like that for a long time, and I hopefully there will be more. But and you will do incredible work. But I'm very, very, very happy to be doing this. Um, in terms of, and thank you for all the nice things you said. In terms of the form of the film and how we sort of structured it, I think, early on, when I was starting to make this film, I was curious about what kind of a newsroom protagonist would Ravish be, who was going to be my protagonist. When I started the film, I started the film around him. So I used to wonder, of course, there's this, you wonder what you're going to discover about your main character. Uh, Early on, I realized that he was very tired and that he would very often speak about giving up. Uh, and it was very, it wasn't a very heroic person that I came across. It almost seemed like somebody who was all very often looking into their phones, sitting there day at their desk, typing out whatever they needed to type out, going home in this sort of dreary, monotonous work day. And it helped me understand that journalism, at least the one that I was witnessing, wasn't like the sort of journalism that I had seen in newsroom dramas uh, uh, on the big screen,
Right,
wherein a
right,
couple of people walk into the room and say, let's do this story
right,
and change the
right,
cover.
right, right.
On the contrary, you were seeing people, and especially with Ravish, doing stories after stories, and almost nothing seemed to be changing. So
Sure.
I wondered, what is it, how is it that you use almost like anxiety and dreariness as a metronome within the film to
Sure.
punctuate the experience of the film. So you start with, of course,
Sure.
with Ravish, who's the main character, and then of course I tracked out his family, his office environment, to try and build a more holistic picture of what his inner and outer life is. But essentially the film is, I think, structured around a sense of anxiety and foreboding, which is something that I felt very often when I was watching the news.
Did you have other structures that you were toying with earlier?
I mean, I was you in the beginning when you come to the table. I would do. I used to. I was trying also to reflect where India was at. Currently there is uh, a couple of news montages to help you understand where the news is at. But earlier, I used to do a lot of these pop culture montages of what's really happening
Mm-hmm.
in the country. And that was there in the
Sure.
first cut. But as the film went along,
Sure.
we realized
Sure.
we needed to focus more on the news ecosphere, what's happening in the news, because it's more reflective of what's happening across the world. And we really
Sure.
zoomed
Sure.
in on Ravish's emotional journey.
Okay, so to segue from this very thing, I wanted to ask you to, if you were to zoom out for a second and speak about the broader synergies or divergences between the documentary form and, I mean, long format nonfiction and journalism. What are the points of osmosis or crosstalk you think between the two? And like, what does journalism teach us about the documentary form and vice versa? Like, how do you think of the relationship between the two, especially in today's extremely fraught media landscape?
I mean, the thing is, firstly, there is no from what I understand, there's not necessarily one fixed definition of journalism itself. There's a sort of classical understanding of old school journalism, which I think is being challenged a plenty within the profession. I'll tell you where I feel I borrow from a lot, which is the sort of, literary long form journalism. I remember when I was just starting out. I'm forgetting the name of the writer, but there was a book called The New Journalism, which was about writers, who worked in that era. Boynton, Robert S.
Do
Boynton.
you recall that you had gifted this to me once?
See, at least I'm consistent. I'm really happy that I'm consistent. That's good. That's good. So I mean, so that's the I read that book, and it helped me understand the process of all these incredible writers, and how they went about structuring their nonfiction and working on it for years. So I inherently see my practice as an evolution of that. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. How do you,
I'm
there's
happy to
obviously
elaborate
whenever
on
one
it
is
more if you want.
delving. Yeah, go on if you want to.
No. I'm just saying, like, this uh, uh, with regards to, very often there is a fair amount of construction that happens within the world of documentary, and there is a sort of narrativization that happens. Uh, uh, I take I came to films first with the need and desire to make fiction films. So I really sort of spent a lot of time chiseling the tools of fiction, of understanding the grand narratives of our times, of understanding characters, of understanding tropes. For example, vis-a-vis Ravish, he's been structured in this film like a tired protagonist, right? So they and whatever his sort of allies are, they fit a certain character type of sorts, character stereotype of sorts, not stereotype, but character mold of types of sorts. Uh, so I have tried to bring that into documentary practice, which is why I call this more it borrows more from literary nonfiction. Uh, uh, and that's more exciting for me. That's always been more exciting for me. I, you
So,
know,
what's the constellation of references,
uh,
be it in terms of literary nonfiction or fiction or documentary, that you felt you were in conversation with or leaning towards?
I mean, so Shaunak, there's so much in your head that you're constantly borrowing from, right? There are, like, I love the films of, I'm not sure if I'm saying the name right because, but Jia Zanke. I remember coming across his vocabulary in my sort of early 20s and being absolutely blown away in terms of the stories and the places that he was talking about seemed very much like home to me. I just saw Nuri Bilge Ceylan's new film, and I admire the way he uses time, within his films. So there is a fair amount of, I mean, I geek out on YouTube videos. There is so much. There are so many bad days when I will log on to YouTube and find something thoroughly inspiring. But in terms of
Mhm.
purely in terms of non-fiction films of our times, films that have stoked something in me. Uh, it's not necessarily a newsroom film, but I think it's a fantastic journalism film, which is Waltz with Bashir. Uh, uh,
Mhm.
I loved the excavation of the self in that film, and I remember it moving me tremendously. I loved the Adam Sandler film by the brothers.
Mhm.
I'm forgetting what was the film called. Uh, it
Uh,
was
an Adam Sandler film?
wasn't it Adam Sandler? Or am I getting the name wrong?
Don't know.
It was about the this thing. Uh, wait, let's do this. Adam, by the Safdie brothers, yeah.
Oh, Uncut Gems.
Uncut Gems. So I remember watching Uncut Gems and loving the anxiety that I was feeling within that film, and
Right.
that is something
Right.
that again uh, that it triggered something in me. It made me want to get there emotionally. Uh, uh, I absolutely love, the early films by Anand Patwardhan, Deepa Dhanraj, in terms of the
Sure.
very stuff that they've done. So there is, a
Sure.
fair
Can
amount
I
of
ask
good
you a
movies.
question to sort of circle back to one of the textures of the film that I felt strongly? And please excuse me if this is a bit too theoretical. The thing is that I was struck by your naming Chelan and Jiazanke, because the thing that often really resonates in a lot of their work is their particular treatment of qualities of exhaustion, fatigue, but also in equal measure resilience. And I was very interested in, like, I understand that you almost used as a trope or a metronome this idea of fatigue or a kind of world weariness. But where do you, like, there's a quality at the end in the film where you feel like, it's like Ravish is this kind of a Don Quixote like figure where life just elliptically goes on and he still sort of like soldiers on. In what way do you understand the idea of, like, can you speak a little more about the idea of exhaustion or resilience?
Uh,
I'm
uh,
trying to essentially push you out of the usual journalistic
no,
quips and the
no,
Q&As
no,
that
I
you've done
understand.
100 times, and try
I
and
can
dig deep right now and say an answer off the cuff.
No, no, I completely understand. The first thing that I mean, exhaustion feels like it feels so much like home right now that I'm like, where should I start? But with regards to Ravish, I think this is for me. Ravish is a mid-career protagonist, somebody who's in his 40s or late 40s and is exhausted with the way the world around him has turned out. He's not a hero in his 20s who is hoping to shake up the world. He's somebody who's seen better times. And it's, when you are at that stage in your career, and, with Ravish, he still enjoys a lot of glamour, a lot of sort of public life. There is a whole lot of people working within the news business whose lives aren't as valorized, who you will see whose dreariness, whose fatigue is invisible. For me, when I came across this sort of unromantic pursuit of idealism, wherein you turn up at your job every day, filing report after report, wherein your victories are so small that it doesn't feel like the needle has shifted at all, but you keep at it. For me, there is a certain beauty to that pursuit, especially in times where grand victories very often are evasive. Uh, uh, but it's like an athlete, uh, but you're not really training for the Olympic. You're training for something that you think is around the corner. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a daily measure of turning up at the tracks, and in this case, you're pursuing the desire to create, I believe, a better world. I mean, that is something
Mm-hmm.
that brought me to filmmaking, wherein I feel like I am turning up every day because I would want to make the world a better place through stories. As delusional as it may sound, I still my idealism has been challenged many times since I started making films, but I still have it in me. And I think the film is reflective of that struggle. Many people within the times that we are living in right now uh, are feeling the loneliness vis-a-vis what's happening around them. They don't quite agree with what's happening with the mainstream political and cultural currents around them, and they don't quite, on many days it feels like a battle that they're losing very quickly, or at least that's what I feel. So my
Mhm.
my ambition with this film was to you know preserve, or I don't know, give a pat on the back to people who are winning small victories, and maybe cherish that, and let them know that I'm in this too with them. So it's,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, retrospectively, for the moment, keep the political question aside, or the ethical question aside. And if I was to ask you that just creatively or aesthetically, if you were given the option of a do-over, what would you change about the film?
What would I change about the film?
Yeah, just creatively or aesthetically, because I think all of us feel this where now that it's been over a year and a half since you made the film,
Yeah.
and at least at any rate, it happens to me that there are bits where my toes curl, and I feel like this is a clear, and I only mean this in terms of either a aesthetic or a structural question, but I feel like this is clearly a grammatical error that I've made, or a language-based error. Are there any things that you feel you would do differently now?
I don't know, yeah, Shaunak. I think I look at it a little differently. The thing is, till I am on the edit, until I am sort of doing my first couple of round of screenings, uh, I I am full of anxieties and doubts, wherein I am just constantly looking at the film and going, there are so many shortcomings, and this just doesn't quite
Sure.
land. So then after the first couple of screenings, honestly, you get some sort of an idea of what's working within the film, what your shortcomings may have been, and
Sure.
where the film is landing. uh, and after that, it's a lot of the phase that I am in right now, which is sort of talking about the film to
Sure.
people, introducing the
Sure.
film, so on and so forth. I feel fairly confident and proud of the film that I have made, and this is exactly the film that I wanted to make. Now,
Sure.
where the shortcomings are not necessarily within the film, but I guess in my own journey as an artist. Like this is reflective of where I am vis-a-vis how I feel about society, and vis-a-vis how I exercise my craft. When I go to my next film, the
Sure.
entire craft I hope will get better. I am not, whatever the sort of little bits were there of changing and tinkering, that I did a lot of it before the edit. And I'm not sure if changing any one of them would make a significant difference to the film. I hope the craft in general gets better with the next film.
No, I just to follow up on that, I meant more like, I've always felt like you become the person who can make the film you're making, through the making of the film. So you sort
Sure.
of become the filmmaker that's required. And essentially, what happens is just that, like it happens with different drafts when you're writing, say, fiction, like different iterations.
Sure.
It's basically after you've given it some time and go back to the work, it's a different version of yourself that, or well, slightly ripened version of yourself that arrives. And therefore, the draft that you see in front of you feels a bit obsolete, actually. It's not punctual to who you are, right? So I meant in that sense, if you feel like there's anything that feels out of sync with what you would do today. But I completely take your answer in terms of the fact that also I know that right now you're entirely drowned in a conversation of the vortex of conversation around the film, and this is a whole hamster wheel unto itself. And during this time, the film sort of takes on a different shape in its own life worlds. I fully understand that. I wanted to end this conversation actually by asking you what was for you, what gave you the most joy creatively, not ethically or emotionally, creatively.
Hmm.
What was the most rewarding thing?
I love uh, being there on shoot and shooting. Like this film has been shot by Aman and me together. I love
Hmm.
being there on shoot, uh, uh, and spending my time around these spaces. Films also is my excuse. It allows me to be there, spend time in places that I wouldn't have access to otherwise in life. And I love, for example, actually, I'll tell you, wait, there's a better answer. I love the days when I'm able to find solutions to things I didn't have solutions for when they first came to me during the process of
Yeah,
filmmaking.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I love
The
those.
process of finding things out
Yeah.
when things seem opaque and then an answer comes through.
And not just opaque, Shaunak, sometimes they seem impossible. Sometimes you spend a
Yeah,
couple of days, or
yeah,
and it's not, you don't always necessarily come to it alone, right? You're sometimes sitting with your team, you're sometimes sitting with your
yeah,
funders, you're sometimes sitting with, like, I would call my producers, Luke, you mentioned Jess. I'd be sitting, you would get on a call with them and something would strike through. And those
yeah,
moments of joy is what I remember, wherein you felt like you had moved forward, you had feel
yeah.
this process of filmmaking had culminated,
Yes,
in a
yes.
certain way. And those days I really enjoy. In fact, they even come now, in the midst of all of this sort of promotional blitzkrieg. Once in a while, you something will happen, and you will know that you've cut through something that seemed impossible a couple of months ago, or maybe a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
And those are the days that sort of keep you going.
yeah, yeah. Like this ineffable sense of forward momentum when it's least expected. I fully understand. Anyway, this was a very unusual conversation given our usual exchanges, Vinay. Thank you so much. And I really think we could have gone on for much longer. But for the listening convenience of people, let's keep it at 20. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.